Good morning, faithful listeners. This is Jen with the Bible Explained podcast. I'm very excited that you're here to share a cup of coffee with me this morning as we discuss 1 Chronicles 5 and 6. Alrighty, so last week we started 1 Chronicles, and up until chapter 9, the only thing the Chronicles are talking about are the genealogies of the different tribes of Israel. So we've already gone through the tribes of Judah and also Reuben and Simeon. And today we're going to discuss the tribes of Gad and Levi. That will be found in 1 Chronicles 5 and 6. But once again, I'm not going to read through the entire chapter, mainly because it'll be a lot to read. And also, I don't want to attempt some of these names. For example, I'm looking at a name right here. It says Jeshishaye. Jeshishaye. I don't even know, and that is why I'm not going to read through the entire chapter right there. But starting in verse 1 of 1 Chronicles 5, it talks about the tribe of Reuben, which we briefly talked about the other day. And it says the tribe of Reuben lived on the other side of the Jordan River. So there were 3 tribes that lived on the east side of the Jordan River. Reuben was one of those tribes. We know that Reuben was a disgraced son. And here's what it says about Reuben in 1 Chronicles 5, verse 1. It says, "The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's couch, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, and the genealogy is not to be listed according to his birthright. For Judah prevailed above his brothers, and from him came the prince, but the birthright was given to Joseph." So Reuben lost his birthright, even though he was the firstborn son of Jacob, also known as Israel, because he went and slept with one of Jacob's wives, which is so disgusting. And obviously, Jacob was very unhappy about that, as anybody would be. And so Reuben lost his birthright because he was gross. And the tribe of Reuben actually didn't grow very well. The only notable thing that they did, it says in verse 10, "In the days of Saul, they made war with the Hagrites, who fell by their hand. They lived in their tents throughout all the land east of Gilead." So that means that they lived on the other side of the Jordan River, and they were the southmost tribe on that side of the Jordan River. So right above them was the tribe of Gad. It says in verse 11, "The sons of Gad lived beside Reuben in the land of Bashan to Selecah." That means they lived right above Reuben, east of the Jordan River. Jumping down to verse 16, it says, "They lived in Gilead, in Bashan and all of its towns, and in the pasture lands of Sharon as far as their borders. All these were listed by genealogies in the days of Jotham, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, king of Israel." So it looks like the author of the Chronicles, who everybody attributes it to, Ezra, it looks like this was already written down during the days of Jeroboam. And the author is referring everybody to that previous document if they want more information about the tribe of Gad. And moving on to verse 18, it says, "The sons of Reuben, the Gadites, and the half-tribe Manasseh, who all lived on the eastern side of the Jordan River, were valiant men. They were able to bear buckler and sword, able to shoot with a bow, and were skillful in war. There were 40,760 that were able to go out to war. They made war with the Hagrites, with Jader and Naphish and Nodab. They were helped against them, and the Hagrites were delivered into their hand, and all who were with them. For they cried to God in the battle, and he answered them because they put their trust in him." So not only did the tribe of Reuben fight and prevail against the Hagrites, but actually every tribe that lived on the east side of the Jordan River also went to battle with the Hagrites. So Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe Manasseh. And actually the reason they won this battle was because it says they cried to God in the battle, and he answered them because they put their trust in him. So the Gadites, the tribe of Reuben, and the half-tribe Manasseh were very successful in this war. It says they took away the Hagrites' livestock. Their camels were 50,000, their sheep were 250,000, and the donkeys were 2,000, and of men 100,000. For many fell slain because the war was of God. They lived in their place until the captivity. So the Reubenites, Gadites, and the Manassites were very successful in taking their portion of the land from the Hagrites. And they lived there all up until the days of captivity when Babylon came and took everybody away from their hometowns. And so now in verses 23 through 26, it's going to talk more about the Manassites, or the tribe of Manasseh. Now, the reason it's called the half-tribe of Manasseh is because the tribe of Manasseh actually had a split, because some of them wanted to live on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and other people in the tribe of Manasseh wanted to live on the western side of the Jordan River. And there was kind of a conflict about that, so they split off and became two half-tribes. So verse 23 through 26 is going to talk about the half-tribe of Manasseh that lived on the other side of the Jordan River and did not enter into the promised land. It says, the children of the half-tribe of Manasseh lived in the land. They increased from Bashan to Baal Hermon, Sinir, and Mount Hermon. These were the heads of their fathers' houses. And it lists 7 names that I'm not going to attempt, but it mentions that they were mighty men of valor and famous men and heads of their fathers' houses. So apparently the princes of Manasseh, or rather the heads of the tribe, were very notable men of their time. They were considered mighty men of valor. So that's clear that this half-tribe of Manasseh started out really good because they had good men overseeing the tribe. However, even though these mighty men of valor were over the tribe, over time, it says Manasseh trespassed against the God of their fathers and played the prostitute after the gods of the peoples of the land whom God destroyed before them. So the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, the king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and he carried away the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and brought them to Hala, Habor, Hara, and the river of Gozan to this day. So though Manasseh started out very good, they did not end well. And this was one of the problems with living on the other side of the Jordan River. Because if you guys remember that story, you possibly won't, because that was a while back. This was all taking place during the wilderness when Moses was still alive. The Reubenites, the Gadites, and half of the Manassites didn't actually want to go into the promised land at all. They wanted to remain kind of in the wilderness. They liked the land. They were like, you know what, we're happy with this. We will stay here. And Moses at first was obviously really worried about this because this Jordan River was separating those 3 tribes from the rest of Israel. So there was some hesitation with whether or not these tribes should be allowed to remain on the other side of the Jordan River. But it ended up happening because the leaders of the tribes were all like, no, we are truly the brothers of Israel. We are never going to separate ourselves from Israel, even though this river divides us. We will never be divided. So Moses let the 2.5 tribes have their way. And at first, everything was hunky-dory. But as you can see, there was problems with the fact that these 3 tribes were so far away from Israel. In fact, they were closer to some of the other nations than they were to Israel because they were kind of out in the wilderness. Like I said, they didn't have as much contact with Israel as they did with some of the nomadic tribes and nations that surrounded them. So they started adopting the gods of those nations because they were kind of living in that land. So it ended up becoming a problem, and that's what the author of Chronicles says here. They trespassed against the God of their fathers and played the prostitute after the gods of the peoples of the land whom God destroyed before them. So the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Syria, and the spirit of Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and he carried away the Reubenites, Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And obviously that is the story of Assyria coming into Israel and carrying everybody away, even before the Babylonians came in and destroyed all of Judah. So that, unfortunately, is what happened to the 2.5 tribes that lived on the eastern side of the Jordan River. So now moving into 1 Chronicles chapter 6, it talks all about the Levites. And this is a very comprehensive chapter, which kind of makes sense, actually, if Ezra is the author of 1 Chronicles, because Ezra himself was a Levite. He was a priest. So he would have known his own history and the history of the Levites very, very well, which is why when you go through this chapter, you're going to actually notice how in-depth and detailed it really is and how the author just really knows the history of the Levites. So here's what it says in verse 1. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Now you guys might remember those names because when Israel was in the wilderness with Moses, God designated the Levites to become the priests of Israel because the Levites were relatively very faithful to God. Now, initially, Levi, the son of Jacob, was kind of cursed in a way because he went and helped his brother Simeon kill an entire group of people. Like they committed like mass genocide against the men of a city. And the reason that happened was because their sister got raped, which is really bad, but they really overdid it. If they wanted to punish somebody, they should have punished the rapist, but they went and like destroyed that entire city because their sister had gotten raped. So Jacob obviously was not happy that his sons Simeon and Levi did this, and he cursed both of them. He told them that they are going to be scattered over the years and that they're never really going to have land of their own. Now that happened to the tribe of Simeon. Simeon kind of got like engulfed into Judah. They sort of became like one tribe after a while. So yeah, the tribe of Simeon sort of lost its identity pretty early on. But the Levites, because over time they were faithful to God, God actually blessed them by scattering them across Israel. The Levites didn't have any land of their own like the other tribes did, but the Levites got a better inheritance. They were able to become the priests and be the ones that taught the rest of Israel all about God's word. So the Levites in the end ended up getting blessed, whereas the tribe of Simeon kind of was cursed and truly did lose its identity and didn't have any land of its own after a while. But it says in verse 1 that the sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Now those three sons, you might recognize the name of them because those were the three like mini tribes within the tribe of Levi, if that makes sense. They were called the Kohathites, the Gershonites, and the Merarites. Now the Kohathite Levites were the ones that were designated to preach God's word and to carry the Ark of the Covenant from place to place. And then the Gershonite Levites were in charge of the temple furniture and making sure everything was like up to date and orderly and taken care of when it comes to like temple furniture. And then the Merarites were in charge of all of the coverings of the temple. So anything that had to do with material that the temple needed, the Merarites were in charge of all of that. So yes, the tribe of Levi, to make things kind of confusing, was broken up into like 3 mini tribes, I guess. And each mini tribe had a role of their own. So in verse 2, it goes into the sons of Kohath, or the Kohathites. It mentions the sons of Kohath were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. The children of Amram were Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. So you'll remember that Aaron and Moses were the priests of Israel during the time that they were in the wilderness. And Miriam, their sister, was a prophetess. So God designated Aaron as becoming the first high priest of Israel. It says the sons of Aaron were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Now, I believe it was Nadab and Abihu, if I'm remembering correctly, that died very early on because they didn't follow the commandments of the temple. But Eleazar, the third child of Aaron, succeeded very well at his role of priest and eventually became the high priest. It says Eleazar became the father of Phinehas. Phinehas was the guy that got really angry because people were defiling God's temple even during the wilderness. The Israelites started worshiping Baal Peor in the wilderness and just doing really nasty things in and around God's temple. And one of the men of Israel started partaking in ritualistic sex, like outside of God's temple. And Phinehas got so angry that he plunged a spear in the back of the man and it went through the girl's stomach. And because he did that, because he stood up for God's temple and for Yahweh to that extent, he was actually considered to be kind of a hero in the days of Israel. It says Phinehas became the father of Abishua. Abishua became the father of Buki, and I'm not going to name all of these names, but a lot of these names you actually might recognize. For example, Zadok, you might recognize. He was the high priest during the days of David, and also Solomon. He helped David during the rebellion of Absalom. So you might recognize that name. But moving forward in verse 22, jumping all the way down there, it says, some more sons of Kohath were Aminadab, his son, Korah, his son, and Asir, his son. So Korah, you might recognize that name as well. Korah was the really terrible guy that wanted to kill Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. He wanted to take power from them and become the leader of Israel, but God judged Korah, and actually the ground opened up and swallowed Korah and his supporters inside. However, the sons of Korah actually survived. God did not kill them. And right now with the members, I'm actually going through the Psalms on Fridays, and a lot of the Psalms that we're talking about were written by the sons of Korah. So at some point in time, the sons of Korah, who were in fact priests, ended up becoming musicians in Israel. So we'll talk about that in a second, actually, because I think that is mentioned here in this chapter. But then in verses 17 through 30, it talks about the sons of Gershom and the sons of Merari. In other words, the families of the Gershonites and the Merarites. But I'm not really going to go into all of those. Instead, I'm going to jump down to verse 31. Here's what it says. These are they whom David set over the service of song in Yahweh's house after the ark came to rest there. They ministered with song before the tabernacle of the tent of meeting until Solomon had built Yahweh's house in Jerusalem. They performed the duties of their office according to their order. These are those who served and their sons. Of the sons of the Kohathites, Herman the singer. And Herman, it says here, was in fact related to Korah. So yes, David appointed the sons of Korah to be singers in the temple. And that is why many of the sons of Korah actually wrote some of the Psalms as well. But David also appointed a Gershonite as a musician. His name was Asaph. And then he appointed Ethan the Merarite. Then in verse 48, it says, their brothers, the Levites, were appointed for all the service of the tabernacle of God's house. But Aaron and his sons offered on the altar of burnt offering and on the altar of incense for all the work of the most holy place and to make atonement for Israel according to all that Moses, the servant of God, had commanded. So only the sons of Aaron, the Kohathites, were allowed to be the ones that sacrificed on the altar, were allowed to be the high priests. Anybody else of the tribe of Levi were allowed to do other things associated with the temple and with worship. For example, being singers or, fixing things inside the temple, but they weren't allowed to be the high priests or offer anything on the altar, I don't believe. But now in verses 54 to the end of the chapter, it's going to talk about where the Levites lived. It says, these are their dwelling places according to their encampments in their borders. To the sons of Aaron, the families of the Kohathites, for theirs was the first lot, they gave them Hebron in the land of Judah and its pasture lands around it. But the fields of the city and its villages they gave to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. That was Caleb the spy. To the sons of Aaron, they gave the cities of refuge, Hebron, Libnah, and also with its pasture lands, Jatir and Eshtemoh with its pasture lands, Helene with its pasture lands, and Debir with its pasture lands, Ashan with its pasture lands, and Beth Shemesh with its pasture lands. And you might be like, well, Jen, I thought the tribe of Levi didn't get any land. You just said that. No, they didn't get any allotment of land, but they were given places to live. The Levites still had to have homes for themselves. And so, yes, they were given little places to live, but they didn't get big chunks of land like the other tribes did. The other tribes got full places where they were able to live. But all of these cities that the Levites were allowed to have, or these pasture lands, were within the borders of the other tribes, if that makes sense. To the rest of the sons of Kohath were given by lot out of the family tribe, out of the half tribe, the tribe of Manasseh, 10 cities. So yeah, all of these cities that they're about to talk about came from different tribes. They got some in Benjamin, they got some in Manasseh, they got some in Zebulun, Judah, and Simeon, I believe. So yes, the Levites did not get an allotment of land, but they were allowed to have places to live. And these cities that they got were called sanctuary cities, or cities of refuge, rather. These were cities that people could go if they accidentally committed manslaughter. And there was nothing that anybody could do to them in those cities. So that was the point of the cities of refuge. God was trying to take care of people a little bit more, especially in this day and age when avenging your dead relative was very, very common. Like if anything happened to somebody's family member, people would hire a avenger of blood, and that person would go out and kill the person who is at fault for the death of the family member. Even if it was an accident or they weren't really at fault at all, it didn't matter back in these days. And so God was giving some protection from that because that was very, very prominent in these days. And so the Levites oversaw these cities of refuge. But yeah, this entire chapter and the one previously is just going back through the allotment of land to the Israelites. And I like going back through all of this because it gives us a little bit more of an understanding of where the Israelites lived and what the land was like and what their culture was like. And that makes you actually be able to understand Scripture a little bit more. So on Wednesday, I'm going to try to go through the rest of all of the genealogies of Israel because they're very short and they kind of go in rapid fire. So I believe we'll be done with the genealogies Wednesday, possibly next Monday. We'll see how things end up breaking up. But faithful listeners, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you guys on Wednesday for another episode from 1 Chronicles, or hopefully tomorrow for an episode from Philippians. Happy listening, and God bless.